just the agenda for today. I'm going to go through kind of four, let's say, key topics. First, I want to introduce Open RAN at a high level to the audience. And then I will dive deeper into the two key organizations that are really enabling Open RAN today. The O-RAN Alliance, which is focused a lot on the specifications for Open RAN, and the Telecom Infra Project, which also called TIP, which is really fostering the ecosystem around definitely around products and solutions and testing as well. And then I'm going to go to the key topic of today's talk, which is the Open RAN value chain. Talk about the key players in the various areas there. And finally, we'll close with some key challenges and also how my employer, Viavi, is helping with some of these challenges. So just an overview. So what is Open RAN? A lot of you are probably familiar. Some people have different opinions, but I think the most, the definition I like most is really, it is a movement, right? It's not just technology. It's not just business, but it's really a movement, a concept, a philosophy of truly embracing openness and disaggregation of the radio access network. Really, it's achieved through three key things. Open hardware. Basically, think of it as general purpose, servers, for example, with accelerators that allows open software to run on these general purpose hardware. But at the same time, having open interfaces that allows multiple parts of the network to be supplied potentially by multiple vendors and still be interoperable. So you think of it as these three things mixing together through interoperability, really leading to a vibrant multi-vendor ecosystem, achieving the benefits of such a ecosystem like vendor diversity, lowering cost, and really increasing innovation. And really, it's been an evolution towards this concept of Open RAN. And it starts, of course, with traditional RAN, starting with maybe let's call it the traditional 4G network as a lot of us know it, right? Today, it's really mostly a closed proprietary system. There's really no open interfaces, no interoperability. It's provided usually by a single vendor across the entire stack, right? Network stack, from the radio head to the baseband unit, all the layers of the stack to the evolved packet core in LTE. In 5G, the disaggregation actually already started even before the Open RAN movement kicked into high gear. It's still a proprietary system, but 3GPP in itself recognized the value of disaggregating the different pieces of network and using standardized interfaces. A good example of that is the F1 interface, which separates the DU or distributed unit from the CU or centralized unit, allowing a virtualized CU, for example, to really be talking to a lot of different DUs. But it's still, some level of disaggregation, but it's still proprietary. It's the open interface, for example, for the front haul is still, it's still not there, and really no interoperability because it's still a single vendor system for the most part. Open RAN is what we see as, let's call it the pinnacle of this evolution towards openness, right? Wherein we further disaggregate the network, even disaggregating the hardware and software pieces. It allows us to fully leverage the cloud, open APIs. And again, the key here is allowing multiple vendors to interoperate. For example, an ORU from vendor A and vendor B could actually interoperate with an ODU from a different vendor, and potentially even an OCU and a RIC from different vendor. And that's the evolution that we're running towards right now. And some of these are already being deployed at scale, as we will see later in the talk. Why is it gaining so much traction? At the end of the day, Open RAN increases choice and flexibility. If you look at traditional RAN today, it's a single vendor providing the full RAN. It's a closed and proprietary system, and really each vendor controls their own ecosystem. And we all know probably the 5 traditional RAN vendors, the biggest incumbents that are today. Open RAN truly allows a much bigger ecosystem to participate in the radio access network. As you can see here, 280 plus vendor companies are participating in the ORAN Alliance. It's just a representative figure here to show that, again, it increases the resilience and stabilizes the supply chain, drives demand, fosters innovation. Again, with a much more diverse ecosystem, it allows people to specialize and hence increase innovation. On the innovation side, the key aspect here is the open and standardized interfaces, which we will see ORAN Alliance is key to making that happen. Again, it allows for increased competition, opportunities for small and medium enterprises to really specialize and provide vertical expertise into different parts of the network stack. And again, using a cloudified virtualized architecture allows for a lot more scale and agility. And this on the right side is a high-level diagram of the ORAN architecture provided from the ORAN Alliance. And just at a high level, right, going from the top down, there is the concept of orchestration automation at the top layer, also called the SMO, which houses the non-real-time RIC, which has the intelligence across the whole network, but also the typical aspects of inventory, policy, configuration, FCAPs, as they say, but automated at a high level. Through the A1 interface, the non-real-time RIC basically interfaces with the near real-time RIC, right? Wherein it's got a lot more of the real-time functions that can influence the scheduling decisions, let's say, of the E2 nodes or the DUs and CUs that it's connected to. And then and through the E2 interface, that's kind of how the near real-time RIC communicates with the various E2 nodes or DUs and CUs. E1 and F1 are actually standardized 3GPP interfaces, but it's also fully adopted by the ORAN Alliance. Again, it's a key here that it uses concepts from NFV or network function virtualization, so that these software functions can run on general purpose hardware. And finally, the ODU, wherein the more layer 2 and upper L1 functions reside, and through the open front hall connected to the ORU, right? Giving you a high-level overview of the ORAN architecture. And you can think of this as every color in this architecture diagram can be provided by a totally different vendor, which is kind of the magic of Open RAN. So where are we today? And this is a typical question that we get a lot. This is a chart that I took from the TechNexus report as of June of last year. This has grown since then. But the headlines here are, there's really two greenfield operators, Rakuten in Japan and Dish Networks in the USA, that are truly, adopting Open RAN in a large scale, right, all the way from the ground up. But then there are also a lot of service providers that are noted here that are starting their limited deployment or in the trial phase. And just in MWC, which I just came back from 2 weeks ago, actually, that Deutsche Telekom have announced that they are deploying their Open RAN in a commercial commercial deployment in New Brandenburg in Germany. Which is really I would say a good development. A chart here to the right kind of also gives you a better snapshot of where things are today in terms of an operator survey that Viavi commissioned through Network Strategies and Heavy Reading, surveyed about 100 operators around the world, which kind of shows you that really majority of operators are either looking at it or are actively deploying Open RAN today, and which is really exciting. And hence, really, there's a lot of market projections out there. This is a snapshot from Markets and Markets in 2022 that really, it's expected to be about $1 billion industry in 2022, growing to a $15 billion industry in 2027. And it's really a pretty impressive CAGR. And a lot of these forecasts, in fact, have been, let's call it, adjusted upwards lately in 2023. And really, you can see here, emerging economies are really, providing a lot of opportunity, again, for small and medium enterprises to really participate in this ecosystem. Again, there's a lot of government funding initiatives, just like this one, that is spurring the growth of this ecosystem. Obviously, a lot of the effort is around 5G. And again, you see collaborations and product launches, and again, from a lot of different vendors around the world, and really Asia Pacific is a key market for Open RAN, and which is hence the large participation in this webinar, which is really pretty impressive. So let me switch gears a bit and talk a little bit about the two key organizations that are really driving Open RAN today. The first one is the O-RAN Alliance, which I'm very active at. It's really at the heart of it. It's a community, right? It's a community of operators, vendors, research and academic institutions, with the mission to transform the RAN to be intelligent, open, virtualized, and interoperable. And you can see the 32 current operator members that are driving this alliance. There's really three main thrusts that the O-RAN Alliance is embarking on. The most important one is the first one, which is the O-RAN specification effort. The O-RAN Alliance is the only body that is truly coming up with specifications. And these specifications for the open interfaces, the open architecture, the test specifications are now beginning to be even put into the ETSI, or the European Standards Organization, to become full-fledged standards and not just specifications. And we had the first open front haul specs have gone through that process and are now officially ETSI standards. Another key aspect of O-RAN is the O-RAN software community. And this is really unique for any alliance, wherein there's a big thrust towards developing open source solutions, right, through the OSC. There's actually a collaboration with the Linux Foundation that is working towards a full end-to-end open software stack for the RAN. And just lately, breaking news in MWC again, there's a memorandum of agreement with the open air interface. Basically that's an open source RAN stack developed primarily by Eurocom in France, but has a lot of partners around the industry and in academia. There's now going to be a much closer collaboration between the O-RAN OSC and OAI to really drive this home of a true open source end-to-end system. And finally, the third main thrust, which is the group that I chair in O-RAN Alliance, is testing and integration, right? It's really a support function for really all the members and contributors in really testing and integrating their implementation. So the TIFG, we organize plug fests. We coordinate these labs called Open Testing and Integration Centers. There's 9 of them now around the world that are, let's call them open labs that allows anybody in that ecosystem to really participate in, bring their equipment, do a plug fest, do a certification and badging test to get their equipment certified. So that's kind of a very key part of fostering this ecosystem. Just kind of a brief overview of the O-RAN Alliance work and focus groups. A lot of the technical work is under the umbrella of the Technical Steering Committee, which I am a member of, being a co-chair of the Test Integration Focus Group. There's also a couple focus group standards development, mostly related to interfacing with outside standards. And I talked about the open source community. There's a total of 11 work groups right now. You can see it listed here. I'm not going to go through every single one in the interest of time, but at a high level, working group 1 is really about the overall architecture and use cases. 2 and 3 are related to the RIC or RAN intelligence. 4 and 5 and parts of 6 are related to open interfaces that are meant to enable the front haul. Working group 5 interfaces related to 3GPP, and work group 6 interfaces related to cloudification of the network. 7 and 8 are white box hardware and open stack design groups that are driving the concept of, obviously, open hardware and open software. And finally, open transport. Transport is the backbone of the RAN, is critical, is working group 9. Working group 10 is orchestration and administration and management. and a workgroup 11, which is, again, a key aspect for Open RAN is security. So my employer, Viavi, is very active in the ORAN Alliance. As I mentioned, we are actually the first TNM vendor to join XRAN Forum before it was even called ORAN. We hold multiple leadership positions. I'm co-chair of TIFG. My colleague is a co-chair of Working Group 9 and member of the kind of the technical steering and oversight committees of various groups. I also happen to be the co-chair of the Next Generation Research Group, looking now into how ORAN should impact 6G. We're also editor of various specs, mostly test specifications, and also rapporteur of key, let's call it cross-work group items related to network energy savings, a very important topic for network operators, and also massive MIMO optimization. So TIP is a similar organization in the sense of it's also an ecosystem of mostly companies, but it's got a slightly different mission from ORAN Alliance. It's really about enabling the supply chain, right? Really focused on fostering that ecosystem, accelerating it, and facilitating it. Okay, so and how it does that is through a process of what they're calling, first of all, release roadmaps, basically forming these blueprints of what a network architecture should look like in terms of using actual vendors in that network architecture. So product releases, requirements around, let's say, outdoor macro or indoor micro, et cetera. Test and validation is also a key aspect of TIP. It's facilitating having common test plans. It uses the ORAN Alliance test specs, but it also uses other specs like 3GPP and other standards, let's say, to come up with test plans around certain products like Open Radio Unit or DU and CU, et cetera. And finally, the marketplace. And this is really important for the TIP members. It allows, TIP member companies that have gone through the process of getting certain badges to really show the operator customers at the end of the day that their product is mature and it's ready to be deployed, especially if you get the gold badge. Again, TIP is really focused on, let's call it the product and solution side, whereas ORAN is much more focused on the specification side. And very recently, in a big event last October, I myself and the chief engineer at TIP, we actually co-presented to the community how ORAN and TIP is working together to really drive the industrialization of Open RAN. And really, it's about making it clearer to the community how the different activities of TIP and ORAN come together. Focusing on how we align on releases, how our specs are used on the ORAN Alliance and used as requirements in TIP, sharing the results, let's say between OTICs and TIP community labs when tests are done, and finally clarifying the differences between the various certificates and badges available both in ORAN and in TIP. So with that, I want to start kind of diving a bit deeper into the Open RAN value chain, understanding that ORAN and TIP are these big ecosystem of vendors, but how are they broken down? How do they contribute to the whole ecosystem? And I'll start with this nice diagram that I actually used from a very good white paper from the 5 big European vendors that are very active in both ORAN Alliance and TIP. And this is an estimated value chain, by the year 2025, and gives you a breakdown of, let's call it 6 key areas, right? So the first one that I'll talk a little bit about is development, and it's basically related to the ORAN lines and TIP, right? Standards and open bodies. It's not applicable in terms of its overall contribution because, again, it's really an enabler towards all of these aspects. But then I'm going to talk quite a bit about, services, RAN software, chips and components, cloud, and RAN hardware. and how they all contribute to the ecosystem, right? Services are really the system integrators, the test equipment companies like my employer, and managed services from the enterprise, right? Which actually comprises a big chunk of the let's call it the potential revenue in Open RAN. RAN software and hardware, again, because of this disaggregation, now there are companies that are focused on software like VNF, CNF, Stack, the RIC, orchestration software, AI software. It's about 9% of the ecosystem. Running on the hardware, for example, DUs, RUs, small cells, etc. That use, of course, chips and components by a lot of the known big vendors out there for general purpose processors, accelerators, and of course, needing the foundry and manufacturing for those processors. And finally, the cloud, right? We're in this whole vision of really fully embracing the cloud-based architecture for the RAN. So this also is a snapshot of the estimated O-RAN vendor revenue forecast, which kind of shows you, it's a typical of these charts where this hockey puck effect. I think the key takeaway here is by 2026, it's estimated that about 20% of total RAN revenues will come from Open RAN, which is astounding because today it's actually pretty small. A big part of it is clearly services, but also the combination of hardware and software, of course, and chips, coming through the remainder of it. And in the next few slides, I'm going to dive into each of those in a bit more detail and talk about some of the companies that are participating in each of these groups in the value chain. First off is semiconductor, right? Think of it as chips and components. First of all, general purpose processors, like the typical vendors here, AMD, ARM, Intel, and XP, are the ones coming up with they're typically general purpose processors that are used in a lot of different areas, but they've specialized them to really run higher layer RAN functions. We've seen that with very recent announcements from each one of these companies of really very much focusing on this up and coming Open RAN market. The next group is, of course, the more specialized chipsets, right? Think about, high demand processing, mostly around the physical layer, packet processing, and companies like, AMD, Broadcom, Marvell, NVIDIA, of course, Qualcomm, right, are coming up with chips. For example, like AMD recently acquired Xilinx, so a lot of the high-speed processing for the RU, accelerators for the DU, for example. And Intel recently released their vRAN boost for their Xeon processors. And of course, they also acquired Altera a few years ago, which kind of provides them that boost. And companies like Marvell, NVIDIA coming up with their own specialized chipsets for this market. And of course, Qualcomm, longtime player in the handset chip market, of course, dominant there. Really also been providing small cell chipsets for a long time, fully embracing the Open RAN here, now providing a lot more specialized chips for the RU, DU, CU, etc. And finally, you can't really create a RAN without the RF and analog. This is, comprises the radio unit front ends. And again, the typical companies are there, AMD, Analog, TI, MaxLinear, that are providing those chips. Again, just to reiterate, this is a representative list of companies. It's not an exhaustive list. So if your company is not listed, let me know, and maybe we can put you in here. The next one is O-RAN hardware, right? These chips now form the hardware that are needed to run the RAN functions. Starting with the ORUs, or open radio units, where really it's primarily RF front end plus the lower physical layer and the front haul interface, right? That's a very high level what an RU provides. And you can see here a broad spectrum of companies. And this is where we're seeing the beginnings of an explosion in terms of smaller companies, maybe a lot of companies here you may not have heard of, participating in the Open RAN marketplace. And some of them are making a lot of headway into actually making it into the deployed networks of, for example, the large scale ones like Rakuten and Dish. And of course, a lot of other trial networks as well. ODUs and OCUs, these are mostly server vendors that you're probably familiar with: Dell, HPE, Contron, Supermicro, QCT. Long time server providers for, again, general purpose, but now are very focused on providing these servers with accelerators that can run the DU and CUs for the RAN. And I mean, the key thing here that these companies need to do is really improve their ability to run deterministically with very tight timing controls, because again, a RAN needs to be obviously very, very well synchronized to run a 5G radio access network. And finally, of course, the full RAN vendors, right? These are the RUDU CUs with various levels of O-RAN compliance. I just put that out there. I'm not going to go into the details here, but these three vendors, incumbents, are not, don't get the impression that they're not participating in O-RAN. They're actually pretty active in the O-RAN Alliance. They have publicly announced support for different aspects of Open RAN, and look to these companies to continue to, let's say, grow their portfolio towards Open RAN. Again, after the hardware we talked about is the software that runs on that general purpose hardware. And you will not see here radio units. I mean, radio units as of today really does not have, let's call it, it's still not fully decoupled from a hardware software standpoint. They're mostly still physical network functions with tightly integrated RF and physical layer functions, and for good reason, because it needs to be very highly optimized, very specialized hardware. However, DUs and CUs are now, of course, a lot of software players have come into play to really provide the, in some cases, bare metal, virtualized, containerized DU and CU software that's really meant to run on the third-party hardware. Think about companies like Capgemini, Capgemini Engineering, right? They acquired Ultron, which has that stack. JMA Wireless, Mavenir is a big player in the Open RAN. Nokia is also, and Samsung are here. Parallel Wireless, Radisys, Rakuten Symphony, which previously is Altiostar, that was acquired by Rakuten. And then the RIC, right? I talked a little bit about the RAN intelligent controller in the overview of the architecture, but this is really, let's call it the brains of the RAN, right? It's software used for controlling and optimizing the RAN functions. There's the non-real-time part and near real-time part. And these companies here are all participating in various levels, whether it's near real-time only, non-real-time only, or both, of providing both a platform, right? Especially companies like VMware, Juniper, Mavenir, providing a platform that allows app vendors to really run their applications on top of that, of their RIC. But also companies that are more vertically integrated, like Nokia and Ericsson, also participating in this, fostering their own ecosystems of app vendors to run on their RIC. And finally, the SMO, right? I mean, we talked about the service management orchestration layer. Really, think about the large scale RAN automation platform. Again, companies like Amdocs, Netcracker, which was acquired by NEC, are big players in this market. DCS, Sienna, the Sienna Blue Planet, very, let's call widely deployed SMO platform. Again, automation is key for a lot of these companies. And of course, the cloud, right? We talked about a key tenet of O-RAN is virtualization and utilizing the cloud. Again, the cloud hardware players here are the typical Dell, HPE, Contron, Lenovo, Vapor. But cloud software providers, mostly focused, of course, on orchestration, automation platforms, companies like Red Hat, VMware, Wind River, and of course the big companies, AWS, Google, and Microsoft, all play in this market and are all making a push towards Open RAN. And the public cloud providers, which will play a key role in deploying the RAN. Companies like that you all are probably familiar with: Amazon, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, IBM, Oracle. And the last component here are services, right? If there's any one big change from traditional RAN to Open RAN, is the importance of systems integrators, right? One of the biggest, let's call it challenges that we'll talk about later, is really integration, right? For companies that are in the traditional RAN marketplace that are fully integrated with complete services, organizations can really be what they would call the single neck to choke for an operator. And that's really valuable because operators want to focus on their core business, which is running and operating their network. And they want to really, want to have a central point of, let's call it, responsibility for all aspects of their network. And I think SIs, or systems integrators, play a key role in that. And hence, there's a lot of movement, a lot of growth expected from these companies that are providing systems integration services. Companies like Tech Mahindra, TCS, NEC are really big players, and of course Capgemini, Accenture, the long time systems companies in the IT space are making a play for, of course, Open RAN systems integration. Test and measurement, right? Companies like Viavi, like my employer, again, focused on providing equipment and services for the development, validation, and deployment testing of these networks, right? Typical companies, are probably not a surprise. Anritsu, Rohde & Schwarz, Keysight, are competitors of Viavi, but key players in this market as well. And finally, enterprise services, right? I think these are typically the companies that already serve enterprise customers today. Service providers are obviously a big enterprise and already a key customer for a lot of these companies. But now with the move towards Open RAN, they're expanding their portfolios towards really service provider key needs is an important part of this ecosystem. So with that, I want to transition to the last part of my talk. Hopefully that was a useful overview. I know it went a little bit fast. We don't have that much time. We want to save time for questions. So I'm going to move on to the key challenges. And I just wanted to put a lot of the key challenges into one slide, overlaying these challenges on a typical, O-RAN network. First challenge is really, we talked a little bit about it already, integration and interoperability, right? Compared to traditional RAN, Open RAN, you see going from 5 to 280 companies, right? Somebody has to put together what has been broken apart, in a sense, right? And so integration, interoperability is very important. How do you manage that overhead? How do you manage the total cost of ownership because of that overhead? And ownership here also relates to, again, going back to the single neck to choke, right? Like, how much should I rely on systems integrators? How much should I rely on my own teams inside my company as an operator, et cetera? And again, with a multi-vendor network, root cause analysis is also a very key, important aspect when you're troubleshooting the network. So this, I would say, is one of the key challenges. Performance, right? One thing that, some critics of Open RAN may say, oh, it will not perform as well as a traditional RAN. The truth of the matter is, it is a challenge, right? You have open interfaces. which makes it really good to foster a vibrant ecosystem. But now you don't have that luxury of, let's call it, optimizing both parts, let's say, of both blocks that are connected by that interface, right? So, however, we're getting close. In a recent report from the 5 European operators that I talked about, have said that the gap between a traditional RAN and Open RAN, at least for let's call it a more standard network configuration, for example, 4T4R, non-massive MIMO, macro network, the performance difference is already, almost none, right? The performance is there. How do we guarantee that performance when we go to much more complex scenarios like massive MIMO, millimeter wave, etc.? So that's something that's still a challenge that even O-RAN Alliance itself is, focusing on how to improve the open front haul to solve these issues. I talked a little bit about timing and synchronization, right? I mean, again, as with any radio access network, especially in a TDD 5G network, timing and sync is a key problem, right? It's a key requirement. Let's put it that way. Now that you've opened up these interfaces, now that you've allowed multiple players to play in this network, even the transport network itself could have multiple players. How do we make sure that synchronization and timing works really well? And really, that plays a role when you're actually doing especially large-scale field deployments, right? Think of a TDD network. Uplink and downlink has to be very, very synchronized so that the uplink does not interfere, or the downlink does not interfere with the uplink of a different cell. So we really need to make sure the field deployment at scale, and test the timing and sync of the entire network, including the transport. Again, functional performance, capacity testing, guaranteeing performance. These are all aspects of a full end-to-end network, right? We talk a lot about the RAN, right? The RAN really is RU, DU, CU, RIC, right? The core is, of course, outside the RAN, but the performance that a handset cares about is the full end-to-end performance. How do we assure that a multi-vendor RAN, including a core, really performs, at scale, at capacity, end-to-end? And finally, security is a big topic. If you follow Open RAN, there's always talk about how do we make sure that with open interfaces, that we, and sometimes using open source software, can we guarantee the security of the network? Clearly, this is a very important aspect. And again, Workgroup 11 O-RAN Alliance is addressing a lot of parts of it. Other groups as well, ETSI, governments are really closely looking at making sure that an Open RAN network is secure and resilient. And energy efficiency, right? I mean, it's not just a problem for Open RAN, it's a problem for any RAN. But clearly, 5G has all these benefits of super high speed, high throughput, very good kind of, URLC features, for example, to enable the enterprise. But making it energy efficient is really key. A lot of operators, a big part of their OpEx budget is towards, paying the electricity bill. Right, so making Open RAN the most energy efficient Open RAN is a key as well for this ecosystem. So let me close with a slide, from Viavi, from my employer. Again, for a lot of these challenges, that's really why a company like Viavi is really heavily investing in Open RAN, because we believe we have the technologies to really solve a lot of these challenges. Again, look at the top diagram of the full O-RAN network. At Viavi, we have a full suite of lab validation products, talk about testing at scale end-to-end, UE emulation up to 10,000 UEs, for example, towards a base station. These are products that are used in, we have 85% market share for these today in the traditional RAN and Open RAN. And again, this is really about, once you've broken up the network, you need to wrap around each component of that network and really test it at scale, and that's our objective for every one of these emulators. Like if you're testing the RU, you need to emulate the air interface on one side and the DU on the other side. If you're testing the DU, you want to test it with the RU emulator on one side and a CU on the other side, etc. Right, all the way up to the RIC and even the core, because I think that's the only way that a network equipment provider can guarantee that their equipment will perform at scale and according to the standards. We also have a wide portfolio of field instrumentation. Once the network is installed, how do you make sure it's installed correctly? How do you make sure that it performs well, timing and sync, interference, etc. And finally, assurance, right? Once the operators have the network up and running, we also provide tools for optimizing the network, visibility in the network, and troubleshooting the network. So with that, hopefully I'm still within time, and I'll be open for any questions.
Let's start off with the first question from Ron Lai Pereira. So, how secured is Open RAN, especially in the Philippines with different security requirements?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, security is a key aspect of Open RAN. Think of it like there is always let's call it a misconception that just because something is open means it's less secure. In fact, it's the reverse, right? Think about Linux, right? It's open source, and compare that to other proprietary OSs in terms of the security attacks that either one of those achieve, right? So there is some amount of security that's achieved by having something really open. So that being said, it is a key aspect that the ORAN Alliance is looking at. We have a whole work group that's looking at it. How secure is it? I guess it's, for the networks that are being deployed right now, it's as secure as you can make it, as if it were a traditional RAN. I think that's kind of the concept here. And one can argue that, with a closed interface, it's proprietary, that you can't inspect, the security vulnerabilities could be higher. But then, again, it's really about making sure that the correct security protocols are being used. Again, security testing is critical for each of the components. So I would say the goal is for it to be, as secure, if not more secure than a traditional network.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. Next question is coming from Carlo Saul Perez. In relation to the ORAN market, is it possible to have an estimation of quantity of ORAN sites like 4G or 5G, not only in USD?
So I don't have that data handy. I think there's a lot of let's call it market research companies out there that probably can offer some estimates and forecasts here. But yeah, I don't think I'm the best person to answer that question. Yeah.
Next question from Clint Hassan. I virtually attended the COMELEC summit last 3 days ago, and they are planning to implement blockchain technology in the automated election system next upcoming national and local election. With this initiative, if the Philippine government, what will be the possible contribution of Open RAN on this initiative, particularly integrating blockchain technology to the AES?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, blockchain is let's call it a key technology trend right now, especially in, of course, in finance space and others. It's actually been discussed within the Working Group 11, the security group, and also discussed quite a bit in the next generation, research group in ORAN Alliance. So it's not, included in the current specifications for ORAN, but it's definitely being discussed, and there has been some discussions around, potentially using it for the future. Yeah.
There's a follow-up question from him, Dr. Wong. Do you have a plan to join this initiative of the Philippine government in upgrading their present system?
Me personally, no. I'm not familiar actually with it, so thanks for letting me know. But Viavi as a company, if it's related to testing the security of the network, we definitely want to be involved for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, from Rosemary Diaz, Dr. Wong, hello. How does one become a member of the ORAN working group?
Great question. So first of all, I mean, your institution or the company you work for, or maybe the university that you're part of, needs to be a member of ORAN Alliance. So to be a member, go to o-ran.org. There's actually a membership site there, and you can ask to be a member if not already. And once you're a member, then you can participate in any of the work groups you want. In fact, the membership fees for academic institutions are very low compared to, of course, companies, right? And so we definitely have quite a few academic members already in the ORAN Alliance. Yeah.
Question from Emmanuel Beloso. What are the major challenges and business problems that Open RAN can help to address? And how can Open RAN enable cost savings?
Looks like you skipped one question, did you? The
Yeah.
fiber
So
optic.
if there's innovation developments in Open RAN would also affect the fiber optics industry.
Yeah, for sure, right? In fact, like as you can see here in this diagram, in Viavi, we're a big player in fiber, especially testing the fiber of the networks. Again, I talked about the transport, right, which is basically the fiber optic backbone of the network. It's making sure that transport network is highly tuned towards these open interfaces. Think about the open front haul, for example, right? It provides different set of requirements compared to the mid haul and the back haul. So absolutely, like fiber is a key part of the Open RAN ecosystem for sure.
Next question from Emmanuel Beloso. What are the major challenges and business problems that Open RAN can help to address? And how can Open RAN enable cost savings?
Right. I mean, that's a great question. I think, we talked a little bit about the challenges, right? The challenges of, let's call it relying on a single vendor RAN, right? For an operator, there's of course, over reliance on a single vendor, on just a few vendors, means that, a lot of times your requirements may not be met, right, by those vendors. So Open RAN allows you to really tune your requirements towards in the network. But also I think you mentioned like opportunities, right? I think things like private networks, for example, in the 5G, right? Basically, providing a network to vertical industries like smart factories, farms, etc. Excuse me. That's a great opportunity for Open RAN, because obviously these are smaller scale compared to, let's call it, metropolitan area type of wide area network. So allows you to really tune the requirements towards private networks. Is a key value prop of Open RAN.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. Question coming from Christian Mark Mauhay. Does Huawei and ZTE are also active in Open RAN? Because I did not see their logo in any part of the Open RAN based on the presentation.
That's a great question. Very astute observation. Huawei is not. I mean, anything I say anyway, you can see from the ORAN Alliance website. So Huawei is not a member of the ORAN Alliance, but ZTE is actually, in fact, a member.
Question coming from Dodgy the Nyosos. What is our big telco in Philippines doing about this Open RAN? Are they like, for example, PLDT or Globe are actively participating and open about it in the near future?
That's a great question. I mean, as far as I know, Smart in the Philippines is a very active participant in the Open RAN movement. They actually have a collaboration with NTT Docomo in Japan, and they've actually showcased some of these in in fact, in their LinkedIn channels. And Globe, I'm not 100% sure, but I do know that Smart is pretty active in the
Yeah.
Open RAN.
Last, I think 2 weeks ago, they published their result of the testings of the Open RAN.
Correct. Yep.
From Amenola Sulaiman, what are the most promising Open RAN technologies and solutions that is applicable in the Philippines that are currently available or under development, and how do they compare to each other?
That's a great question. I mean, as you know, I graduated from University of Philippines. I think the talent in the Philippines is enormous. There's a lot of potential, especially Open RAN opens up that opportunity for the telco space, right? I see it as small and medium enterprises can definitely participate. Let's say in the RAN intelligent controller app market, right? Think about it as X apps and R apps that providing key intelligence functions, right? Things like using machine learning to mine the data from operators to really optimize the network. I think these are and other software functions like providing a full stack, or even radio, right? I mean, we have good talent in hardware as well. Now that the radio unit marketplace is opening up, we see quite a few, for example, smaller OEMs in Taiwan participating very actively in this marketplace. So I think these are good opportunities really for the Philippines to participate in the market for sure.
Okay, question coming from Brian Mendoza. When can we expect the adoption of Open RAN in the Philippines in a massive scale? Red Smart has successfully deployed fully functional Open RAN proof of concept with NTT Docomo.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm the best person to answer that question. It would be good to. I think Smart maybe is coming to speak as well, right? So I think that would be a good question for them. And what I know is from a large scale deployments, and I talked about it in the talk, right? Dish and Rakuten are really the only greenfield large scale deployments. There's a lot of smaller scale deployments, whether trial networks or commercial, around the world today. So I think it'll be good for us to maybe ask Smart and those questions. Yeah.
From Dominic Campo, seeing the potential of Open RAN, if the Open RAN would be implemented here in the Philippines, how would the Open RAN may affect the common consumer in terms of the cost of using the services of telco companies?
Again, a great question. I mean, the goal, right, is to really lower the cost of RAN, right? I think I mentioned, one of the biggest cost drivers for an operator is the radio access network, right? And so opening up that ecosystem, having more vendor diversity means more competitive price pressure, among different competing companies. So hopefully driving down the cost, and hopefully those cost savings passing down to consumers, right? I think that's the whole idea, and hopefully Open RAN will fulfill that promise. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just skip some questions, Dr. Wong.
Yeah, sure, please. Yeah, I think we're maybe running out of time. Yeah.
So just coming from a question coming from Carlos Saul. Do you expect to include Open RAN into 3GPP?
Again, a great question. In fact, this is discussed quite a bit in the ORAN Alliance. I think the answer is the desire for the ORAN Alliance is yes. To really, a lot of the work done by the Alliance, we would like to see it adopted by 3GPP. I think we're slowly making progress towards that, right? As you know, ETSI is one of the standards groups that are stakeholders in 3GPP, and ETSI has adopted, the ORAN Alliance, specification. So we definitely would want to see ORAN Alliance specifications to be adopted by 3GPP. Yeah.
From Anna J. Monte, if fiber optic is highly recommended for O-RAN, how about the microwave radio? Is there a special microwave transport equipment or brand that can deliver equal quality as FOC?
Yeah, I mean, microwave or fiber, I mean, these are, let's call it, potential technologies, right? Microwave can definitely be used for the backhaul, for example. It's still a bit more challenging for it to be used in the front haul, because of the, really there's cost concerns, there's, latency, and throughput concerns, right? But yeah, I think, as just like any other network, an operator may decide to deploy, in some cases, microwave links instead of fiber, because it makes more sense. Yeah. Nothing precludes that, for sure. Yeah.